I actually have heard of Edward Hopper only because of Nighthawks. That also was my first piece by him. Except I saw the James Dean version first, not the original one. So right now we will be moving on to the Q&A section. So if you have a question, please write it down on the little slips of paper that you received during your registration at the beginning of the talk, and hold it up, and one of our volunteers will come and pass it to me, and I will relay the question over to our speaker today. So we heard a lot about Edward Hopper today, and you already sort of mentioned a little bit about yourself in the beginning, but can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your interests in art?
Well, I always wanted to study art. I generally like art history, and so I like to study about different artists. And when I study the work, I usually like to study about their creative backgrounds. Because the thing about artists, sometimes they don't tell the full story of what they're trying to convey, and sometimes their compositions might be misleading, or you just don't get the message. So art history is extremely relevant when you're studying the artist, and I like that, studying about what the artist was going through and how it reflects their work.
So can you sort of tell us the parallel between your interest in art and your current career as an English teacher here in South Korea?
Like many people, I kind of overextended myself. Art for me was a passion degree. When I graduated high school, I told my mom I was going to get a master's degree, and she thought I was going to be a doctor. But I became an artist, and so she was very sad. But, you know, it was a passion for me. I knew that there was no way I could get a master's degree. I don't have it in me to go and study science or business. I loved art, so that's what I studied, and I overextended myself, and I took on too much student loan debt. So I realized I had to make a living off this degree. I had to make it work somehow.
Have you exposed yourself to any of the Korean art or some of the...
I have viewed a lot of Korean art. I honestly think that the artists at Cheonam University are producing some of the most amazing work I've seen here in Gwangju. I do like traditional Korean art, but I like these art students at Cheonam because a lot of their work, whenever I go to the Kumo Gallery, they are just producing amazing compositions. A lot of their subject matter is unconventional, and they have these new creative ways of looking at old subjects, and the work that they're producing is just, it's amazing. It's on par with US artists.
Okay. Can you tell us why it's important to study history in art as well?
Well, the reason why is because the artists, a lot of what they're doing is internalizing history in their work. They're internalizing and then they're reproducing it, reconveying it to you, the viewer. Sometimes it's difficult to understand, like in the case with Hopper. A lot of his work, many of his pieces are very interesting, but if you don't know about what's going on with the Gilded Age or the Great Depression or the Industrial Age, you might miss something and you might not get what's going on. The same can be said for a lot of artists like Magritte and Salvador Dali. Surrealism, it actually started out as a poetry movement. That's all it really was. It was a poetry movement. And Salvador Dali figured out a way to take this poetry and visualize it and make it visual narratives, you know? And so if you understand art history, you understand the artist better, and the work becomes more relevant.
Thank you. What would you say to someone who is interested in art, but is afraid of the career prospects, but still has a passion for art?
I think art is very relevant and very important, and you need to make a conscious decision if this is what you want to do. I always wanted to be an artist. I always wanted to study art. I always wanted to study art history, and I knew I could never afford it. But it was something I wanted to do because it shapes you. It shapes you creatively and intellectually. Art, believe it or not, is an intellectual process. You know, no matter where you are in life academically, whenever you're looking at a piece of art, it's an intellectual experience. Because the thing is your brain is working in tandem. Your left hemisphere is working in tandem with your right hemisphere. And you're constantly negotiating what's going on in that work. And so the thing is, when you study art, when you produce art, when you learn more about artists, you learn more about yourself.
Next, we have a question from the audience. This is regarding I suppose the Nighthawks with James Dean and everything. Reproduction of artwork, isn't that a violation of copyright?
It technically is a violation of copyright. However, in copyright law basically states that if you change a piece of artwork, you change it from its original source, it no longer becomes copyrighted material. If they produced Edward Hopper's painting exclusively exactly the way it was, yes, that would in fact be copyright infringement. But by manipulating the characters, if you change anything in the painting, even if it's a couple windows, then it opens up the door to free property. And so that's why a lot of artists, they do that. Whenever they reproduce a work, they don't reproduce it to scale or composition, but they make their own changes. So it's basically implying what's going on in the original piece, but adding their own little touch to it. It's a loophole. It's a loophole, but it exists.
Are the grim moods of Hopper's paintings trying to reflect the empty promises of capitalism in America in the early 20th century?
I think a lot of that is what Hopper was trying to convey. That the thing is, the capitalists and their incessant greed, you know, and pushing people to buy, was you know, forcing people further and further into poverty. You know, and the thing is, the capitalists, they survived the Great Depression. You know, they didn't have to worry about what was going on in their lives. They survived it. They pulled out as soon as they could. Once the stock market was crashing, anybody who had income overseas, sending their money overseas, so they survived it. But anybody else that was left behind, like the Great Depression was like an atom bomb going off. Once it exploded, everyone was affected. Not only Americans, but Europeans, everyone. Because America was stimulating the overseas economy by buying imports and exports. And once our economy failed, a lot of European countries were affected as well. So a lot of these capitalists, like Henry Ford and, you know, all these capitalists in the industry, they survived, but everyone else, they were left to their own devices.
Is there any special reason why you have such a special interest on Edward Hopper specifically?
Well, again, because of his city narratives. Edward Hopper was a painter who connected with the everyman. He connected with the common person. He didn't really paint extravagant paintings. He didn't create these beautiful cityscapes about how beautiful New York was and come to New York and you'd be so. No, he painted New York the way he saw it, the way everyone else saw it. He connected with people on a personal level. He connected with the realism of life. You know, he didn't want to try and mislead you. He wanted to tell you, like, okay, this is life in New York. You know, I'm not George O'Keeffe. I'm not someone who's trying to tell you the elegance of, you know, Broadway and, you know, living in Manhattan. No, this is the grueling aspect of living in the city. These are your conditions you're going to have to deal with. Dealing with the isolation, dealing with the poverty, dealing with the anxiety of being in this large, bustling city where you have to worry about your own safety, and you have to worry about all these little frustrations of the big city. That's what he wanted to try and convey. He wanted to try and connect with the everyman. And that's why a lot of people love his work, and that's why he still has strong influence even in the 21st century.
So, this question, art was a tool for people to express their power in the Middle Age, but in realism, the role of art has changed. So how did Edward Hopper's paintings influence society in a way that sort of relates to those who are trying to express their power?
Well, Edward Hopper, the way he painted, Edward Hopper was not influenced by European thought. Even though he looked at the Impressionists, he looked at a lot of the Surrealists, he looked at a lot of the painters that were working at the time, he wasn't fazed by them because that was Europe, this was America. He went to Paris twice, he went to Europe 3 times total, and then after he left, after his 3rd time, he never went back overseas again. He never had any reason to go back overseas. That was Europe, this is America. And so what Edward Hopper was trying to push was that, you know, create what you want, create what you see, you know, and don't change for anyone. I mean, he painted over 800 paintings, and his style never changed. He was very consistent. He painted the way he wanted to paint, and he tried to express it to other people. That, you know what, even though someone like Picasso is going through his blue period, his pink period, he's experimenting with abstract and cubism, find something that works for you, and then go with it and be comfortable with it. And that's the style that he was comfortable with.
So this will be our last question. We're running out of time, but if you have any further questions, please stay after the talk and we can have discussion one-on-one with our speaker. So our last question is, in his paintings, women appear frequently. Why did he decide to put women frequently? Is there a special reason for this?
Yeah, the reason why is because for vanity reasons. During the 1920s, women were portrayed, you know, in vanity ways, you know, alluring and sexual and stuff like that. Edward Hopper, he wanted to put women in his paintings to show that yes, women, you know, exist in this male-dominant society of the 1920s. But if you look at his women, none of them are really graceful. None of them are, there's nothing really sexual about them. They exist in the city. He wasn't trying to portray women in a sexual way, but he was trying to portray them in a more realistic way. That, listen, even though this is a man's world, there are still women who are working behind the scenes to make things work. So you see women, they're toiling in the restaurants. They're toiling behind the registers. They're sitting alone in a coffee shop or doing whatever they're doing, working in a cinema. They're not portrayed sexually in any way, but portrayed in a way that's very real, you know? And he wanted to get away from that. He wanted to separate himself from other artists because he was conservative.
Thank you. We have more questions, but as I said before, if you have any further questions you'd like to ask, please stay after the talk, and then we can ask our speaker one-on-one.